On July 10, the administration sends Congress a new war powers notification, effectively restarting the 60-day clock again. So I'm concerned about this sequence because you have a situation where the claim essentially allows the president to extinguish the war powers clock just at the moment that it becomes legally inconvenient through declaration of temporary ceasefire. Then it's reset, avoiding the congressional authorization that the Constitution requires and the war powers intends.
On July 18th, American aircraft hit a village called Banji on Iran's southern coast. 3 days later, a United States senator asked the highest-ranking military officer in the country a simple question about it. Did we bomb the water plant? And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said he wasn't aware of it. Not that it didn't happen. Not that it wasn't us. That he hadn't heard about it. Then Senator Jeff Merkley asked him something even simpler. He asked him to confirm that the water people drink to stay alive isn't a legitimate military target. That's not a controversial statement. That is settled law, written down after the Second World War, and every officer in that building has been trained on it. Watch what a 4-star general does when you ask him to say yes. If you want the parts of these hearings that don't make the evening news, subscribe. It's free, and it tells the algorithm this matters. I'm Neil. This is the honest perspective. When the law becomes a thing, nobody in the room will say out loud, "That's not a gap in the briefing." That's the answer. Let's get into it.
Secretary Hegseth, I want to ask just specific to Iran authorization. The administration has made the case that the action in Iran falls under the president's Article 2 authorities, and we can have disagreement. Reasonable people can disagree about the boundaries of the presidential war powers and have for a long period of time. But I look at the war powers resolution, and it's not ambiguous. It requires the president to terminate hostilities within 60 days absent congressional authorization. So hostilities began February 28th. May 1st, Congress was informed that hostilities had ended, but yet despite the fact that hostilities had ended, we were still seeing sailors being fired upon still activity. Then in June, MOU is signed to preserve the ceasefire while negotiations continue. That MOU has now collapsed, and we are seeing the resumed attacks in the Straits of Hormuz. On July 10, the administration sends Congress a new war powers notification, effectively restarting the 60-day clock again. So I'm concerned about this sequence because you have a situation where the claim essentially allows the president to extinguish the war powers clock just at the moment that it becomes legally inconvenient through declaration of temporary ceasefire. Then it's reset, avoiding the congressional authorization that the Constitution requires and the war powers intends. So we had an opportunity in previous appropriations hearing for me to ask if you felt the administration had all the authority that it needed. You indicated at that time that no, additional authority was not needed. Is the administration still taking that position about needing no authorization from Congress at this time?
Senator, I know there's a long-standing legal debate on this particular topic, but we certainly, as a department, share the position of the White House that we have all the authorities necessary at this moment.
So let me just kind of do a follow-on. In the Clinton administration, this is 1999, there was an operation that was launched, Operation Allied Force, NATO airstrikes against Yugoslavia. There was not a prior congressional authorization that was sought. President Clinton notified Congress under the War Powers Resolution and then subsequent to that, sent Congress an emergency supplemental funding request. It was about $6 billion to cover the cost of Kosovo operations. Congress then passed a supplemental package that covered the president's request plus additional military funding. But Congress never passed a standalone authorization for use of military force in Kosovo. When the war powers clock was set to run out then in May of 1999, the the Clinton Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel issued an opinion holding that the supplemental appropriation itself, passed without any authorizing language, satisfied the War Powers Resolution requirement. So is the department looking to that or intending to rely on that same reasoning that funding alone can substitute for explicit congressional authorization?
Senator, I would have to defer to our legal department, and we'll get back to you with our views on that. But as of right now, we think standalone Article 2 authorities exist for us to conduct this operation on behalf of the defense of the American people, that the president has those authorities, and seeking this funding is important in pursuit of that and our $1.5 trillion budget. But I wouldn't connect the two without consulting with our legal folks first.
Hold on to one word from that: defer. Lisa Murkowski is a Republican. She just walked the Secretary of War through the mechanism. You declare a ceasefire the moment the 60-day clock gets legally inconvenient. Then you restart the clock, and the authorization Congress is supposed to give never has to happen. And he didn't argue with her. He deferred to the lawyers. Then she found the precedent. 1999. Kosovo. Bill Clinton's Justice Department wrote an opinion saying that if Congress funds a war, that funding counts as permission. So she asked the obvious question: is that what you're doing here? Is the check the authorization? Defer to the legal department. Remember that word, because it's about to come back from a different man about a much older law.
And Chairman Kane, I think there was a sense that the President expressed at the start of the war that the U.S. military power was overwhelming and would likely produce unconditional surrender quickly by Iran. And that obviously hasn't happened. Was it your opinion as well? Did you feel like our military force could produce an unconditional surrender in quick order?
Sir, I won't, with due respect, I won't share my private advice to the President. What I will assure you and the American people is I always speak truth to power and offer an accurate assessment of what my assessment is of both our readiness, the plans and activities that might be undertaken, the associated risks, and the secondary and tertiary considerations that go with those opinions or options.
Thank you. So you feel like the various risks that the Iran could possibly close the strait, despite the destruction of their navy, that the possibility of assassinating their political leaders and their military leaders could produce a strengthened hardline and weaken the reformers, that Iran would have the ability to sustain its ability to attack sites throughout the Middle East, that the initial requirements of the war could surely deplete our basically high-end standoff munitions, that this could affect our relations with our allies. All those were factors well considered in this decision to go to war.
Sir, as I said, I won't opine on or share my private advice to the President.
I'm not asking about your Vice President. I'm asking you. Did you understand these issues, or have these become revelations as the wars unfolded?
Sir, my job is to understand all of the considerations that go into the carefully considered use of military power.
Let me ask you this then.
Yes, sir.
So I understand why you don't want to respond, but these are all massive risks that seem to be poorly weighed in the beginning of this misadventure.
Count the refusals in what you just watched. Merkley lays out every risk that actually came true. The strait closes, the hardliners get stronger, and the reformers get weaker. Our high-end munitions run down. Our allies get nervous. And asks whether any of that was weighed before the first bomb fell. And each time, Kane says a version of the same thing. I won't share my private advice. I won't opine on hypotheticals. Fine. That's a real convention, and generals have hidden behind it for 200 years. But hypotheticals are one thing. What comes next isn't hypothetical. It already happened. It happened 3 days before this hearing, and the head of the water company in that province put his name to it publicly. So watch the convention change shape. Because when the question stops being about advice and starts being about the law, Kane needs a new answer.
Currently, there are reports that we have hit the Banji desalination plant that provides water to about 20 villages or about 10,000 people, and we also damaged the desalination plant at Kesham Island. Were these deliberate targets by the United States?
So I'm not aware of those as being particular targets, nor am I aware of those reports, and I'll have to go back and get back to you on that.
If you could, I'd appreciate that. You are aware that infrastructure that civilians rely on to survive is not generally considered legitimate military targets?
Sir, as you know, we have a robust process which considers a target that goes through a system that looks at a variety of considerations to include what you're alluding to around both purely civilian or dual-use targets. I have trust and confidence in CENTCOM that they're looking at the range of those things on a daily
It
basis.
sounds like you are assuring us that we will, the United States, not target, even in retaliatory sense, infrastructure that is generally considered to be primarily for civilian survival.
Sir, as I mentioned, we have a robust process, and we have the most professional military force
It'd just
in the
be
world
nice
that
to have
follows
you
the
say
law.
yes, because this
It
is
follows the
international law.
Yes,
If
sir,
you
it follows
understand
the
the
law.
international law.
I do, sir. I've got a lot of lawyers that help me understand it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And will you get back to us on that
Yes, sir,
question of
of
whether we
course.
targeted the
Yes, sir.
desalination plants, and
Of
if so, why?
I'm not aware of those as being particular targets, nor am I aware of those reports. Let's establish what there was to be aware of. The man who went on the record about Banji is not an Iranian government spokesman. His name is Hamza Pour, and he runs the Hormozgan Water and Wastewater Company. Speaking to the Tasnim news agency, he said drinking water to 20 villages, roughly 10,000 people, had been completely disrupted, and that a seawater pumping station and a power transformer serving the plant were completely destroyed. Iranian state media put the outage at about 10,000 people across nearly 24 villages. And this was happening during an excessive heat warning. That's a named civilian utility executive describing a broken pump. You can hold Iranian state media at arm's length and still notice that's a specific, falsifiable claim from someone whose job is water. The same night, according to Iranian state reporting picked up by Fortune and others, American strikes hit 2 road tunnels and a bridge on the main highway toward Bandar Abbas, and a second desalination facility on Keshem Island was damaged. Roughly 100 telecommunications masts went down across northern Hormozgan. Local authorities said 7 people were killed in the province. Here's what Central Command said it hit that night: surveillance sites, military logistics infrastructure, underground weapons, storage, and maritime capabilities. Notice what that statement does. It doesn't deny the water plant. It just doesn't mention it. And when reporters pressed, when they asked directly whether the United States was responsible for the strikes on bridges, on electrical infrastructure, on water facilities, the White House didn't comment, and the Pentagon pointed them back to Central Command. CENTCOM declined to confirm. A White House official told the BBC no civilian infrastructure was hit. So the official American position is not, we didn't do it. The official position is a shrug in 3 directions. Now here's the part that makes Kane's answer harder to accept, and it's the reason I wanted to build a video around this exchange rather than the shouting matches later in the same hearing. This was not new ground in July. It was already an international incident in March. On March 7th, the second week of this war, Iran's foreign minister accused the United States of striking a freshwater desalination plant on Keshem Island, cutting water to 30 villages. He called it a blatant crime and said Washington had set the precedent. The United States and Israel both denied that one. Around the same time, Bahrain accused Iran of damaging a Bahraini desalination plant in a drone attack. So water infrastructure entered the revenge cycle in this war's opening weeks in both directions, and it was covered in foreign policy, in wire copy, in Iranian and Israeli press alike. 4 months later, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was not aware of the reports. And the day before he said that, the Monday before this Tuesday hearing, the President of the United States posted a thread on Truth Social warning that American forces could go after critical parts of Iran's civilian infrastructure if Tehran didn't reopen the strait. His own spokesperson stood by it and waved off the suggestion that bombing water plants might be a war crime. So Merkley wasn't asking Kane to speculate about some far-off scenario. He was asking the nation's top officer to comment on a category of target his commander-in-chief had publicly threatened 24 hours earlier, and that reporting says had already been hit 3 days before that. And there's reporting on the internal argument, too. Politico reported that the Pentagon has been weighing strikes on what it calls dual-use infrastructure, including desalination plants, and that there is real tension inside the building about where the line sits. The justification, according to that reporting, is that soldiers need water to drink too. So the plant that keeps 10,000 villagers alive becomes a military object because the army is thirsty. That is the answer Kane declined to give Merkley in public. Not, I don't know. The argument exists. It's written down. It's being fought over by his own lawyers. He just didn't want to say it into a microphone with C-SPAN running. So let's talk about the law he wouldn't affirm. The clearest statement of it is Article 54 of the First Additional Protocol to the Geneva Conventions. It prohibits attacking, destroying, removing, or rendering useless objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population. And it names them: foodstuffs, agricultural areas, irrigation works, and explicitly, drinking water installations and supplies. I want to be straight with you about the caveat, because this channel doesn't survive on half quotes. The United States is not a party to that protocol. Washington has never ratified it. But successive American administrations and the Defense Department's own Law of War manual have long treated the core of that rule as customary international law, the kind that binds you whether you sign the paper or not, which is precisely why the dual-use argument exists at all. You don't build an elaborate legal workaround for a rule you think doesn't apply to you. And no court has ruled on Bonji. The United States has not confirmed responsibility. I'm not going to tell you a war crime has been established, because it hasn't been. What I'm telling you is that a senator asked a general to affirm the rule, and the general reached for process instead. We have a robust process. I have trust and confidence in CENTCOM. I've got a lot of lawyers that help me understand it. Merkley's response is the line I'd put on the wall. Be nice to have you say yes, because this is international law. Now, the strategic argument, which is where this stops being about Iran and starts being about us. Roughly 44% of the world's desalination capacity sits in the Gulf Cooperation Council states: Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia. Countries where a huge share of the drinking water comes out of a small number of large, complex, electricity-hungry plants that cannot be quickly replaced. Those are our partners. Those are also the places where our troops are stationed. And Iran has said out loud, through Tasnim, that if the United States goes after Iranian power generation, Gulf energy and desalination facilities are the answer. A desalination plant in Kuwait has already burned during this war. Iran has already killed American service members with drones in Kuwait, in Jordan, in Bahrain. I'm not describing a government with clean hands, and I won't pretend otherwise. But that's the point. When you establish that water as a target, you don't get to establish it only for the other guy. You've just handed a legal permission slip to a country that has spent this entire war looking for one, and the infrastructure on our side of that ledger is more concentrated and more fragile than theirs. Which brings me to the strangest thing about Dan Kane in that room. Earlier in the very same hearing, Senator Reid asked him whether airstrikes alone would beat Iran, and Kane said something honest. Air power's got limits, and we always have to be mindful of those. Reporting since has said he's raised alarms internally about how fast we're burning through air defense interceptors. And last week, CNN reported that the chairman has privately made clear the United States needs to find an off-ramp from this war, because the escalation options on the table could backfire. So the man refusing to opine on hypotheticals has, by multiple accounts, been telling the White House in private exactly what he wouldn't tell the Senate in public. That the ladder only goes one direction, that the rungs get worse, and that somebody needs to find the exit. He was under no obligation to reveal his advice to the president. He was under no obligation to confirm a target list. But he was asked one question that required none of that. Is water off limits? Questions for the record from that hearing were due on July 28th. As of this recording, I have not been able to find any public answer from General Kane to Senator Merkley on whether the United States targeted those desalination plants, or why. If that changes, I'll cover it, and I'll say so on camera. Until then, here's where we are. A war nobody authorized, funded by a supplemental that the ranking member of that committee says is padded with things that have nothing to do with Iran. A legal theory borrowed from a 1999 opinion that says your money counts as your consent. And 10,000 people in 20 villages in the heat without water. While the two men who could tell you whether that was on purpose both defer to the lawyers. If you believe that the moment a government stops being able to say plainly what it will and won't bomb is the moment citizens should start paying much closer attention. Subscribe to The Honest Perspective. Share this with somebody who thinks these hearings are theater. This one wasn't. I'm Neil. Water isn't a weapons system, and the fact that we needed a senator to say it out loud should frighten you more than any missile in that transcript. That's the honest perspective, and that's where I'll leave you.